Norman going ballistic put people off their jobs and took their eye off the ball. But on the upside, he was a brilliant military strategist with a lot of experience. He understood the Arabs and the Arab world, and he was a great diplomat and was able to bring nations along and foreign armies along in a way that a lesser man would not have been able to.
When human lives are on the line, you cannot be cavalier. You can't do enough. You cannot do enough. You must do everything you possibly can and leave no stone unturned, and you can't settle. You can never settle for second best or a second-class solution when you're dealing with enterprises of such magnitude that they involve the lives of literally thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Colin Powell and the American Defense Secretary, Dick Cheney, flew in to check the plans. Schwarzkopf said he'd attack in 2 weeks, not before.
Dick liked Norm, respected Norm, had confidence in Norm, but every now and then Dick reflected on the fact that this was a very important operation. It was for all the marbles, as we say. And Norm was known to be volatile. Norm was known to be also reluctant. I sort of get the tag for being the reluctant warrior, but you won't find many of my military colleagues who were anxious to race into this before we were ready to race into it.
Despite the bombing of Iraq, Saddam Hussein still had 400,000 troops around Kuwait, behind a barrier of minefields, trenches and barbed wire. He believed he and his generals could force a bloody stalemate if Allied troops attacked these defenses, and that the lesson of Vietnam was America would not tolerate heavy casualties.
Saddam thought the American troops were not prepared for the experience of battle, and that Vietnam had traumatized the American administration.
Schwarzkopf was worried. He was relying on B-52s from the Vietnam era to destroy the Iraqi forces dug in around Kuwait. They dropped 72,000 bombs. Most fell on empty desert. A mistake in the programming of the B-52's navigation system was discovered. Even then, high winds still blew most bombs off course.
We thought that we would destroy tanks somewhere between the 20 and 30 a day, and we weren't coming anywhere close. We were down in the area of 6 or 8. And so after about 10 days of that, I knew that we had to do something different.
Glosson now sent 2 F-111 jets on a mission that would have far-reaching consequences.
Ready? Now, laser on.
When they reached the Iraqi front lines, the crews saw that even the best camouflaged tank showed up as a white rectangle on their heat-detecting cameras. The tanks had grown hot in the daytime sun.
20 seconds. There's definitely something there. 4-2 is east.
Unlike the B-52s, the F-111s carried laser-guided bombs.
4, 3, 2, 1, impact. Okay, sequence me.
One by one, hundreds of tanks were picked off. Under the constant bombing, the Iraqi army began to disintegrate. The Allies didn't realize, but some 200,000 Iraqi soldiers deserted.
It had a devastating effect. Let me give you an example. We inspected one infantry division. There should have been 15,000 soldiers in that division, but we found only 34. There was no one left. 34 out of 15,000.
Colin Powell and Dick Cheney returned from their visit to Schwarzkopf. They told an impatient George Bush the Allied troops could attack in 2 weeks. Bush was anxious the date didn't slip. Moscow's support, crucial to the coalition, was weakening. Earlier that day, the Soviets had suggested postponing the attack to allow negotiations.
We are not going to suit somebody else's timetable, whether he lives in Baghdad or any place else.
When the War Cabinet met to inspect the plan of attack, the President's impatience was tempered with a stark warning. The fighting on the ground would be bloodier than he expected.
Colin made a very eloquent statement warning everybody it was going to be a lot uglier and a lot messier than they thought. The battle would not go as the plans said, and that he had an obligation to warn the president about casualties, that there were unpredictable circumstances in war, and that once it started, the president was no longer in control.
But the president's impatience was justified. On Gorbachev's orders, a high-ranking Soviet diplomat traveled to Baghdad. Yevgeny Primakov's mission was to urge Saddam Hussein to accept a face-saving deal. After inspecting the damage, Primakov was taken to a government guest house in central Baghdad.
He came in wearing a long trench coat. It was cold. There was an electric stove on. When we were left alone, I told him, "I'm not a military expert, but if a land offensive begins, your troops in Kuwait will be wiped out. You have a great burden of responsibility." Then he said for the first time quite directly, "Okay, I'm going to withdraw my troops from Kuwait. I just want to be sure that as I retreat, they don't shoot me in the back."
48 hours before the ground attack was due, Iraq's Foreign Minister Tariq Aziz arrived in Moscow. Saddam's admission that he was willing to withdraw had led to frantic Soviet diplomacy to save their old ally from defeat. Aziz went straight to the Kremlin. The Soviet president was waiting. Aziz told Gorbachev he wouldn't accept the UN resolutions that called for Iraq to recognize Kuwait's independence and pay compensation. But he said Iraq would withdraw from Kuwait. Gorbachev thought that was good enough. He telephoned Washington.
We kept coming back to him and saying, no, you continually are suggesting approaches which do not require an unconditional withdrawal. And we were never going to accept a negotiating down from the UN resolutions.
Nevertheless, the president summoned his key advisors to a critical meeting. On offer was what they'd always wanted, an Iraqi withdrawal without the need for a bloody land war. But Saddam would walk away unpunished and undefeated. At dawn, the president called Gorbachev to tell him the deal was unacceptable.
The president just said, no, I'm sorry. You know, he's had all the chances. He's had months. He's had from August 2nd